The Prepared Leader. Emerge from any crisis more resilient than before by Lynn, Wooten and Erika H. James. Hi everyone. Today I am going to review the book, The Prepared Leader. Emerge from any crisis more resilient than before by Lynn, Wooten and Erika H. James. Crises build over time and, if not predictable, may be foreseeable. In March 2020, the World Health Organization officially declared COVID-19 a pandemic. The upheaval accompanying the virus was evident in public demonstrations, international strains, economic tensions, the Great Resignation, and populist and protectionist pressures. The pandemic took an economic toll on businesses and households, closed schools and eroded human capital. The World Bank and the Brookings Institution put a dollar value on the lives lost and economic disruption, but the tally and long-term, less examined costs remains unclear. Planning for the unlikely and the unknowable is not only possible, it is something you can do with relative ease and facility. By March 2020, the time for prevention had passed. Only emergency reactions were possible. It did not have to be that way. Epidemiologists had warned of future pandemics as early as the 1980s. In the early 2000s, when SARS traumatized Asia, quarantines, masks, temperature tests, virtual classrooms and hoarding became standard operating procedure in Asian nations. In 2015, Ebola erupted in West Africa, causing worldwide fear as 1 out of 2 patients died. The world's response was a cycle of panic, neglect. But crises are inevitable. They always occur. Responding to a crisis is not business as usual, so being ready is the fourth bottom line. Cognitive biases impede effective preparation and crisis management. These cognitive tendencies impede crisis preparation and leadership. 1. Probability neglect. People underestimate the chances that a crisis will affect them. 2. Hyperbolic discounting. People are short-sighted and often don't recognize danger until it stares them in the face. 3. Anchoring. People tend to think their first impressions are reliable and base future decisions upon them. 4. Exponential growth bias. People think in terms of steady, linear development instead of explosive, exponential growth on many fronts. 5. Sunk cost fallacy. Once people commit to a response, they resist changing to a different plan. Such biases are an ancient, evolutionary legacy that originally supported human survival. But they can mislead you in a contemporary environment. Prepared leadership in a crisis can be a little like playing jazz. Fortunately, preparation and well-planned systems and procedures can overcome these biases, help you avoid unfortunate decisions and allow you to prepare for the next crisis. Such preparation is as useful in ordinary times as during crisis mode. Although crises may strike suddenly, leaders must manage them in several phases. The first thing you must do when managing a crisis is to recognize what's impending. Volkswagen's emissions scandal, for example, erupted in 2015, but its senior engineers noticed potential problems at least a year earlier. When the scandal exploded, it made global headlines, resulted in hundreds of class action lawsuits and cost the company $30 billion in fines. Once you recognize a looming crisis, do your best to prevent it and prepare for it. Some nations acted promptly to address COVID's risk. Although New Zealand didn't achieve zero COVID, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's early response helped the country minimize cases, fatalities and restrictions. Preparation can cushion a crisis's negative effects. Sound procedures, teams in ready mode and organizational drills can make crisis readiness an opportunity for improvement. Learning is perhaps the most critical skill in prepared leadership. Before a crisis, establish a protocol and follow it when a crisis hits. Restrict and localize the crisis as much as possible to keep damage to a minimum. Set a path to recovery and learn from the crisis. Nextdoor, a social media network for neighbors, confronted a crisis when news reports revealed that people were using Nextdoor to sow negative feelings about ethnic minorities by reporting them for suspicious behavior. Nextdoor conducted diversity training, revised its guidelines and redesigned its app. This prompt action cut search profiling by 75% within a few months. Leaders need an array of skills to execute the phases of crisis response. Seeing a sign of a possible threat is one thing, but grasping its meaning is another. Prepared leaders understand the difference between signals and noise. They comprehend the nature of threats. Insightful understanding overcomes people's cognitive biases toward ignoring threats or minimizing risks. Leaders must choose a point of view. After they capture diverse opinions and perspectives, they must put all the ideas together somehow and decide on a perspective from which to approach the situation. Leaders must sway others and coordinate their activities. This requires clear communication and integration. To become a prepared leader, you need to be able to align, mobilize and reassure others, even in tenuous situations. Individual agility is necessary, but an agile organization that's sufficiently flexible to adapt quickly to changing circumstances will prove self-sustaining in a crisis. No one wants to make a mistake, but in a crisis, mistakes happen. Leaders should understand they face greater risks by doing nothing than by making honest mistakes. Prepared leaders respond nimbly to circumstances and take such risks. In the wake of the pandemic, resilience became a buzzword. To cultivate a resilient organization, give your people the power and autonomy they need to grow, decide and act confidently. With proper preparation, you can view every problem in a crisis as an opportunity to learn. Leaders who fail to inculcate learning keep cycling through panic-neglect mode as inevitable crises occur. The most important aspect of managing a crisis is learning from it. Use crisis framing to help shape your decision-making procedures. If you approach crisis situations as opportunities, you'll be more likely to invest your resources in positive actions rather than taking defensive stances to ward off perceived dangers. Midway through the first year of the pandemic, José Cil, CEO of Restaurant Brands International, RBI, made a striking announcement on behalf of Burger King. He and his team had developed a plan for the "Restaurant of Tomorrow" that would drastically alter food delivery mechanisms and make the restaurants more sustainable. Bringing this change about would entail spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to modify each Burger King restaurant worldwide before 2032. You cannot prepare for any future crisis without first learning the lessons that experience has to teach. The company's gutsy plan meshed with worldwide trends which became more pronounced during the pandemic, and RBI's leaders expect to more than recoup their investment. Having close associates who see opportunity as well as some who worry over threats is a useful balance. Are you, as a leader, averse to risk or conflict? Do you focus on the long or short term? How open are you to your team's perspectives and to change, in general? These tendencies affect your ability to make decisions in a crisis. Be aware that cognitive biases resonate more loudly in crisis decisions. Crises alter team dynamics. Teams that normally function well may falter in a crisis. Leaders may have to defer to expertise and build a new team equipped especially for the crisis. This requires listening to a variety of ideas and, perhaps, even upsetting the hierarchy by bringing frontline staff to the fore to share their experiences. Minimize all red tape and bureaucracy, and remain as open and accessible to your team as possible. As hard as it is to navigate a crisis, having to step in during the middle of the crisis to steer an existing team makes a leader's job much more difficult. When Wanya Lucas became chief of the Hallmark Networks the summer after COVID hit, she knew the usual ways of getting acquainted with her team wouldn't work. Instead, she made Zoom calls with staff members to discuss their vision of Hallmark's future. Lucas forged rapport with her team members and addressed their concerns about the pandemic and her transition to leadership. Two-way sharing helps. Keep your promises and make sure your team members do too. Ensure people have the qualifications to complete their tasks. You must trust your team members, and they must know they can trust you. A worldwide crisis increases complexity exponentially. When a crisis is global, everything happens at once. As you prepare your team and methodology for crisis response, expand your thinking with a global mindset. You need cultural sensitivity to fathom the ramifications of the crisis and your organization's response. Technology is critical in a globalized crisis, and proved integral to the worldwide response to COVID. For example, the UK National Health Service embraced collaborative technology to speed up the quest for answers to COVID. Leveraging technology in a crisis also fundamentally entails understanding that it is a tool that can be used for change, but just a tool, nonetheless, and that digital transformation ultimately is people transformation. Technology can also amplify leadership's missteps, however. CEO Greg Glassman of CrossFit Gyms learned the perils of technology, particularly as exacerbated by a different crisis. An ill-advised tweet making light of the police murder of George Floyd, combined with similarly inappropriate remarks to gym owners on a Zoom call, led to Glassman's downfall in just half a week. As one crisis fades, apply its lessons to the next. The National Basketball Association, NBA, experienced several crises before COVID-19 came along. Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, practiced prepared leadership when he recognized how reports that some players guilty of domestic violence had brought unwanted publicity to the National Football League, NFL. The fact that the NBA was not, at that point, facing similar public scrutiny didn't make Silver complacent. Instead, he learned from the NFL's experience and prepared. When a basketball player assaulted a woman in 2014, the NBA suspended him promptly. It also published an analysis of the case explaining who knew what, when, and what the NBA had done about it. On the day that the World Health Organization described COVID-19 as a pandemic, Silver considered the evidence and expert advice, and announced the NBA's first suspension of a season of games. Eventually, the NBA created an isolated venue where players could live and work, without risk of infection, and played a complete season of 172 games at that location during the pandemic. In a crisis, you never know where or when that one piece of key information will surface, so it's critical to have everyone in the room. This step cost the NBA almost $200 million, yet enabled it to regain $1.5 billion in earnings it would have lost with no loss of life. Silver learned from experience and won praise for his leadership. Some leaders may unconsciously believe that crises happen somewhere else to someone else, but Silver did not make the mistake of assuming his organization could elude COVID-19. Failing to learn from experience creates future risk. Leaders who miss signs of an impending crisis fail to understand what is happening and to seek different points of view. They don't learn from the past to make preparatory improvements for the future. Several factors may underpin such failures. The leader may function in a monoculture with insufficient diversity. Organizations will have difficulties weathering crises if their cultures negate differences and insiders can't voice their opinions or offer information contrary to conventional wisdom. Where discrimination and a lack of diversity flourish, so too do short-sighted leadership, myopic leadership, and echo chambers. Although people prefer success stories, some of the most important lessons come from failure. Prepared leaders establish a habit of continuous learning and collaboration for themselves and their people. The time to recognize early warning signs, read the signals and take preventive measures is before a crisis. Make that strategy business as usual. Discover opportunities to learn from others' experiences and develop a mechanism to bring that information into your firm's decision-making process. Learning must continue even when fighting the flames of crisis. As the flames subside, conduct an after-action review, share learning and make necessary changes. Takeaways. 1. Crises build over time and, if not predictable, may be foreseeable. 2. Cognitive biases impede effective preparation and crisis management. 3. Although crises may strike suddenly, leaders must manage them in several phases. 4. Leaders need an array of skills to execute the phases of crisis response. 5. With proper preparation, you can view every problem in a crisis as an opportunity to learn. 6. Crises alter team dynamics. 7. A worldwide crisis increases complexity, exponentially. 8. As one crisis fades, apply its lessons to the next. 9. Failing to learn from experience creates future risk. Please like, share and subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.